Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a bit of first-class turbulence today. Seems some people don't quite know how to behave when flying luxury. The voice rang out from the intercom like a cold blade slicing through the already quiet cabin. David Hawthorne, his hand still suspended midair with a glass of scotch that hadn't touched his lips, froze. The soft, amber light refracted off the glass, casting quiet but sharp glimmers. The carefully chosen words carried unmistakable meaning. As if they had been written in jet trails across the sky, David's eyes turned to the young flight attendant standing nearby. Her face remained professionally composed, but the slight widening of her eyes betrayed her emotions. She understood, everyone in first class understood. The captain's veiled message didn't stem from anything serious, just a polite request from David for a second glass of scotch before takeoff and a brief, calm exchange about the service timeline which had been resolved smoothly minutes earlier. At 58, David's silver-streaked hair was neatly trimmed, and his tailored suit cost more than several months of the captain's salary. He was no stranger to moments like this. Subtle reminders, sharp as razors, that no matter his Harvard MBA, his 30 years of experience building businesses, or his current role as CEO of Summit Tech International, the first thing people still noticed was his skin color. The flight attendant turned back, her voice soft. "Mr. Hawthorne, I sincerely apologize. I don't know what's gotten into Captain Moore. He's never acted like this before." David placed his glass on the table with a calmness that was almost unnerving. "Moore," he repeated, "Vincent Moore." A vague memory surfaced 6 months ago. Summit Tech had advised on the merger of a regional airline. There had been a captain who threatened to sue, claiming reverse discrimination when passed over for promotion. That was him. Yes, the attendant confirmed. He's been with Continental Skies for almost 20 years. David nodded slowly, feeling the irony settle over him like a lead blanket. Captain Vincent Moore had no idea that the passenger he'd just insulted was not only qualified to fly first class, but also happened to be the CEO of the company that had just acquired a controlling stake in the airline, a fact still under wraps until the official announcement next week. David opened his phone, his mind shifting like a chessboard being reset at lightning speed. Captain Moore didn't know it yet, but his career was facing serious turbulence. 12 hours earlier, David had been standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of his office in Brighton, watching streaks of early autumn rain slide down the glass. The city was draped in fog, its skyscrapers stretching like fingers toward the sky. "We definitely need to push up the Wellington announcement, don't we?" he asked, eyes still fixed outside. "Leaks from the press leave us no choice," said Victoria Lane, his COO and close friend of 15 years, tapping rhythmically on her tablet like the tick of a Swiss watch. Continental Skies' stock jumped 6% on rumors alone. "We need to regain control of the narrative." David watched as a plane descended toward Evergreen International Airport, its lights dim through the rain. "So, I need to be in Wellington tomorrow, not next week. The jet's in maintenance. I could only get you a first-class seat on the 9:15 p.m. flight." Victoria shrugged, voice tinged with amusement. "I know you hate flying commercial." David turned and smiled. At 55, Victoria carried the air of someone who had shattered glass ceilings since the 90s. Her elegant gray bob and refined fashion sense had become the unofficial image of Summit Tech. "I flew coach for the first 20 years of my career. A few hours in first class is nothing." He returned to his desk, a luxurious walnut slab that once belonged to his father. "What about Sophia's concert?" A shadow passed over Victoria's face. She'll understand. She always does. And that's what worries me. David picked up the photo on his desk. 16-year-old Sophia smiled brightly behind a piano. It had been 4 years since that picture was taken, and he'd missed far too many performances. Now, with Sophia in her final year at Arden Conservatory, her understanding had evolved into acceptance. Her father was always too busy with work. She's playing Chopin's Ballade in G minor. Her mother's favorite, Victoria's tone, softened. Let me hire a professional crew to record it. It'll be almost like you were there. David shook his head. He knew nothing could replace real presence. It had been 8 years since Eleanor, his partner, co-founder, and beloved wife, passed away, and every missed moment, like this, felt like a small betrayal. Necessary, but still a betrayal. Send me the acquisition files to review on the flight, he said, shifting the subject, and have legal prepare a report on the senior executive team at Continental Skies. I want to know who I'll be dealing with. They're in your secure folder. Victoria nodded. Oh, and the pilots' union rep wants a meeting the moment we go public. They're concerned about the merger. David's jaw tightened slightly. They have reason to be. 14. Captains are earning over 20% above industry average with performance reviews that don't match. That needs correcting. But the pilots' union is strong, Victoria reminded him. I'm always careful. David replied. He glanced at his watch, a vintage Omega passed down from his father, who had worked 2 jobs to put him through school. I have dinner with Senator Prescott tonight. Make sure the hotel in Wellington has a secure meeting room for the morning. Victoria nodded. Car picks you up at 7. And David, she paused at the door. Try to enjoy the concert recording, whether you're there or not. Sophia plays for you. David stood at the window again. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, and the city blurred into streaks of shadow and light. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Good luck at the big meeting. Dad, I'll play loud enough for you to hear it from Wellington. David smiled, heart tightening. I'll be listening always. Regarding the merger, the pilots are very concerned. Victoria Lane's voice came through the line as David Hawthorne stood by the window, eyes following the streaks of rain, spreading across the glass like memories that had never dried. David clenched his jaw slightly, almost unconsciously. They have a reason to be, he said. There are 14 captains on the executive team at Continental Skies, earning over 20% above the industry average. Their performance evaluations don't match the pay. That needs to be addressed. The pilots' union is strong. Victoria reminded him, I always know how to be cautious. David replied, glancing at his vintage Omega watch, a heritage gift from his father, who once worked 2 jobs just to put him through college. I have dinner with Senator Prescott tonight. Make sure the hotel in Wellington prepares a secure meeting room for the morning. Already arranged, Victoria said, making a final note on her tablet. The car will pick you up at 7. And, David, she hesitated at the door. Try to enjoy the concert recording. Sophia still plays for you whether you're there or not. After she left, David returned to the window. The rain had grown heavier, blurring the lights of Brighton into a vibrant, abstract painting. He thought about Sophia, about Eleanor, about a life that sometimes felt like it was happening in another room, audible but never within reach. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. Good luck at your big meeting. Dad, I'll play really loudly so you can hear it from Wellington. David smiled, chest tightening. His daughter had her mother's gentleness and the ability to forgive his absences. Even before he could apologize for them, "I'll be listening." "Always," he replied. The next morning, David walked through the concourse of Evergreen International Airport with the poise of someone who had conquered hundreds of airports across 6 continents. His familiar, handcrafted leather bag slung over one shoulder contained exactly what was needed for 24 hours in Wellington: a clean dress shirt, personal items, acquisition documents, and Sophia's concert program, which he'd tucked in at the last moment. Passengers jostled around him, eyes glued to phones, faces marked with annoyance over wasted time. But David was different. He moved with purpose, unhurried, as if every step had already been calculated. Hawthorne. A young man in a Continental Skies Airlines uniform approached, extending a polite hand. "I'm Tyler Evans, customer service manager. Ms. Lane called ahead. We've expedited your security process. I'll escort you to the boarding gate personally." David was slightly surprised Victoria hadn't mentioned informing the airline, but he appreciated the thoughtfulness. Tyler took his bag and led him through the priority security lane and into the first-class lounge. "You're welcome to board whenever you're ready. The flight is on time, scheduled to depart at 9:15 p.m. In the quiet of the lounge, David sipped a coffee while reviewing the acquisition documents for Continental Skies, a strategic deal. Though the airline was struggling financially, its flight routes and gate access were valuable assets for Summit Tech, especially as the aviation industry was strongly rebounding post-pandemic. The personnel files confirmed what Victoria had mentioned: a bloated management structure, several senior roles drawing above standard salaries with underwhelming productivity. One name appeared repeatedly in the HR notes: Captain Vincent Moore. 20 years of experience, a spotless safety record, but numerous complaints from junior staff about his authoritarian leadership style. David made a mental note to discuss this with the transition team. The airline industry was evolving. Outdated top-down leadership no longer aligned with the collaborative culture Summit Tech was building. When it was time to board, Tyler returned and escorted him onto the plane. First class was sparsely populated, with wide, comfortable leather seats. David settled into seat 2A, declining the champagne offered by the flight attendant, opting instead for a glass of scotch. "Of course, Mr. Hawthorne," the flight attendant smiled. "I'll bring it right away." He observed the boarding passengers. A young mother struggled to carry her baby and drag her luggage. An elderly couple stepped carefully, each movement deliberate. A businessman about his age was already yelling into his phone, ignoring the request to switch off devices. The flight attendant returned with the drink. "Here you go. Do you need anything else before takeoff?" David smiled. "This is perfect." He took a sip and added, "I might ask for another later." She nodded. "I'll come back after we've finished boarding." Time passed slowly as the cabin filled. David sat quietly, going over key points for the next day's meeting. The second drink had not yet arrived. As the attendant passed by again, he gently called out, "Excuse me. I asked for another drink a while ago." Her face shifted slightly, a flicker of guilt and confusion. "I'm sorry, sir. We're preparing for takeoff. I'll bring your drink as soon as we've reached cruising altitude." Madeline, the young flight attendant, spoke with a hesitant tone laced with concern. David Hawthorne gave a slight nod, though he preferred to be served before the more unstable moments of liftoff. "I understand. But since we haven't moved yet..." "Sir, that's airline policy. I need to ensure the cabin is secure for departure." David raised an eyebrow, but his tone remained polite. "Of course, not a problem. An older flight attendant approached her, calm gaze that of someone who had handled thousands of similar situations. "Is there a problem here?" Madeline, Mr. Hawthorne, simply requested another drink before takeoff. Madeline explained the word "before" was subtly emphasized, and David realized she was trying to defend herself. The senior attendant offered a courteous smile. "I'll be happy to bring it to you once we're in the air. It'll just be about 15 minutes. David gestured with his hand. "No worries, I can wait." As the two attendants walked away, David overheard Madeline whisper something like first-class expectations. He let it go, turning his attention to the safety video playing on the screen in front of him. The cabin door closed, the familiar chime sounded, and then the captain's voice came on, professional, confident. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Vincent Moore, and I'm honored to welcome you aboard Continental Skies Flight 1372 to Wellington." David immediately looked up when he heard the name Vincent Moore, the name flagged in the HR report, the one who once sued for reverse discrimination. What a coincidence that he was piloting this very flight. The plane pulled away from the gate, slowly taxiing along the runway, queuing for takeoff. 10 more minutes passed before the captain's voice returned, this time with a trace of frustration. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are number 6 in line for departure. Seems like a busy evening. Thank you for your patience." David finished his scotch, placing the empty glass in the holder. The man across the aisle was still arguing on the phone, whispering, but not quietly. Behind them, a young mother tried to soothe a child who had begun to fuss. As Madeline passed by, David smiled and gestured toward his empty glass. "Since we're still on the ground, perhaps now would be a good time." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do." A few minutes later, she returned with a fresh glass of scotch, carefully placing it on his armrest. "Here you go, sir. But just to let you know, I'll need to collect the glass before takeoff." "Understood. Thank you, Madeline." Then the intercom sounded again, but this time Captain Moore's tone had shifted. Still outwardly professional, but with an undercurrent that made the cabin fall quieter than usual. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of urban turbulence in the first-class cabin. It seems some passengers don't know how to behave in this section. If everyone just stayed in their seat, this flight would go a lot smoother." David froze as if the air had been sucked from the cabin. The veiled racial insinuation was thin as thread, yet toxic as invisible gas. No one in first class met his eyes. Everyone suddenly became intensely focused on their phones or safety cards. Only the man across the aisle looked up, met David's gaze, then gave a slight shake of the head, an expression somewhere between sympathy and discomfort. Madeline returned, visibly shaken. "Mr. Hawthorne, I sincerely apologize. I don't know why Captain Moore said that. I've never heard him speak like that before." David set his glass down, his movement slow and deliberate, as if weighing every gesture. "Moore, Vincent Moore. Yes, he's been with Continental Skies for nearly 20 years. David nodded, his gaze growing distant. 2 decades flying for the same airline on the same routes, likely watching younger pilots. Many of them, women or people of color, advance past him. That kind of man often brewed resentment, clinging to outdated beliefs about who belonged where. "Is there anything I can do, sir?" Madeline asked, unsure how best to handle the situation. "No need. I'll take care of it after we land." David's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of someone who was always listened to. The aircraft began to lift off. The thrust pressed him into his seat as the city of Brighton shrank below. Streets turned into geometric grids, then dissolved into the vast blue expanse of the lake. David looked out the window, a bitter smile playing on his lips. Flying to Wellington to take control of an airline while being insulted by a man who had no idea who he was. Once they reached cruising altitude, David opened his laptop. His fingers began typing line after line appearing on the screen. Change of plans. Full background check on Captain Vincent Moore. Entire employment record at Continental Skies. Complaints, performance evaluations, everything, as discreetly as possible. David Hawthorne paused for a few seconds before typing more, and postponed the acquisition announcement. Until tomorrow, I want to attend Sophia's recital in person. Some things shouldn't be delayed. After hitting send, he reopened the acquisition file. The section describing corporate culture indicated that Continental Skies was struggling with modernization, with many longtime employee groups resisting change. Pilots, in particular conservative, entrenched in the old hierarchy, and often hostile to workforce diversity initiatives. That thought was still lingering when a flight attendant approached Mr. Hawthorne. "I'm Catherine Miller, the lead flight attendant. May, I have a word with you." David gently closed his laptop. Of course, Catherine's expression remained professional, but her eyes showed a trace of inner conflict. I wanted to personally apologize for Captain Moore's announcement. It does not reflect the values of our airline. She paused briefly, then continued. He claimed he was referring to general boarding disorder, not targeting anyone specifically. David looked her in the eye, his tone calm but clear. "I understand, but did he clarify who was the source of that so-called urban turbulence?" Catherine flushed slightly. "No, sir. He didn't name anyone. I appreciate you coming to speak with me. I understand this isn't an easy position to be in." She gave a small nod, a flicker of gratitude in her gaze. "Is there anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable?" David considered for a moment. "Yes, I'd like to speak with Captain Moore after we land." Catherine hesitated. "I'm not sure that's possible, sir. Flight crews usually have very tight schedules." David gave a faint smile. "I think Captain Moore will want to make time for this conversation. Just tell him David Hawthorne wants to see him." He paused, his voice firmer. "David Hawthorne of Summit Tech International." Catherine's eyes widened for a moment. "Yes, sir. I'll pass along the message." As she walked away, David noticed a few passengers watching. The man across the aisle leaned in and spoke in a lowered voice. "Apologies, I overheard. Are you David Hawthorne, CEO of Summit Tech?" David gave a slight nod. "That's right. I'm Simon Carlyle from Meridian Capital." The man extended a hand across the aisle. That announcement was seriously out of line. "If you're filing a complaint, I'd be happy to serve as a witness." "Thank you, Simon, but I'll handle this in my own way." Simon nodded knowingly. Smart acquisition. Even if Continental Skies has management issues, their assets are still worth it. David raised an eyebrow. "The deal hasn't been publicly announced yet." Simon offered a wry smile. "Just hallway talk, Mr. Hawthorne. In our industry, nothing stays secret for long." Their conversation was cut short by a sudden jolt. The aircraft dipped slightly before stabilizing. The seatbelt sign lit up, followed by Catherine's voice over the intercom asking everyone to return to their seats. David closed his laptop and turned his gaze toward the window. The clouds below seemed to invite imagination. He recalled a game from Sophia's childhood father and daughter, spotting shapes in the sky every vacation with Eleanor. Once his wife swore she saw Beethoven conducting an invisible orchestra. The memory struck his heart not as pain, but as a tender scar. He glanced at his watch. Just over 5 hours until Sophia would perform at Arden Conservatory playing Chopin's Ballade, a piece he once vowed never to miss again. Rescheduling wasn't just about attending a recital. It was a message to himself that some things cannot be replaced. The acquisition would proceed whether he arrived in Wellington today or tomorrow, but his presence in his daughter's moment that couldn't wait. Once the turbulence passed, Madeline returned with a fresh scotch. This time her smile was more natural. "Here's your scotch, Mr. Hawthorne, and Miss Catherine asked me to let you know that Captain Moore has agreed to meet with you after landing." "Thank you." Madeline. David raised the glass but didn't drink immediately. His thoughts were already on the conversation to come. Vincent Moore, a man raised in a system that treated power as a birthright, was now confronting a world that was shifting under his feet. Was it prejudice or fear? Fear of losing status, of being replaced, of no longer being the center of the world. David had encountered many such men in his career. Those who saw diversity as a threat, not a strength. Those who mistook equality as a loss of their own power. And he knew sometimes you had to face them head on. This time, David Hawthorne decided he would not remain silent like he had before. The plane began its descent, tilting slightly to align with the runway. Through breaks in the clouds, David could see the city of Wellington stretching below highways weaving like tangled threads, skyscrapers crowded in the city center. He had closed his laptop. Half an hour earlier, the acquisition documents had been thoroughly reviewed and annotated. Now, his mind was focused solely on the upcoming conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching Wellington Metroport. The local time is 4:47 p.m. with a warm temperature of 78 degrees. Captain Vincent Moore's voice came over the intercom, no longer bearing the arrogance from before, replaced instead by the smooth professionalism of a man with thousands of flight hours under his belt. David detected a hint of hesitation in every word. Clearly, Catherine had not only mentioned his name, but also explained his role in the company's future. He wondered if the pilot now felt the pressure, or if he still believed his position was secure enough to survive any complaint, even one from a highly important passenger. The landing was smooth, just a gentle bump before the plane rolled toward the terminal. As soon as the aircraft came to a stop, passengers began to rise, opening overhead bins and pulling on coats. Despite the seatbelt sign still being lit, Catherine approached. David's seat leaned in and whispered discreetly, "Hawthorne, Captain Moore has agreed to speak with you briefly after the other passengers have deplaned. If you don't mind waiting a few more minutes, I'll escort you to the cockpit." "Thank you, Catherine. That will be fine." The cabin slowly emptied. David remained seated calmly, replying to emails on his phone. On his way out, Simon Carlyle stopped to shake his hand once more. "Good luck with the meeting, Mr. Hawthorne. If the airline knows what's good for it, there'll be changes after today's flight. I appreciate your concern, Simone. Have a good day." When the last passenger had left and the cleaning crew was asked to wait, Catherine motioned for David to come forward. The cockpit door was open. Inside, the two pilots were finishing post-flight procedures. The co-pilot, a young man with neatly trimmed blonde hair who looked tense, nodded at David quickly, excused himself, and slipped past him to exit. Only Captain Vincent Moore remained the man who looked exactly as David had imagined. In his 50s, his face weathered by years in the air. Gray hair cut in a stiff military style from the 1980s. his uniform immaculate, buttoned all the way up, a sign of someone who believed in hierarchy and revered symbols of authority. Captain Moore. This is Mr. David Hawthorne. Catherine made a tactful exit after the introduction, gently closing the door to give them privacy. Moore stood and extended his hand with a polite smile, but his eyes were completely cold. "Mr. Hawthorne, how may I assist you today?" David didn't shake his hand. He met the pilot's eyes directly. "I think you know why I'm here." Moore's hand slowly dropped, his expression tightening. "If this is about my announcement regarding the cabin disturbance, I want to be clear. I was referring to the inconvenience during boarding, not to any individual." "We both know that's not true," David replied, his voice calm but firm. "You spoke of urban turbulence and said that certain people don't know how to behave in first class and should stay in their place." The racial undertone couldn't have been more obvious. Moore's jaw tensed. "Sir, I've flown for over 30 years. I've never had a single complaint about discrimination. If you choose to misinterpret a standard announcement and assign racial connotations to it, that reflects your own bias more than mine." David gave a small nod as though weighing the words. "Interesting. So you're saying that the phrase urban turbulence, a loaded term with decades of coded racial usage, was just an innocent choice of words." Moore began to lose his patience, subtly shifting into a defensive stance. "Sir, my responsibility is to ensure the safety of all passengers. When someone doesn't follow pre-takeoff protocol and makes service requests at inappropriate times, it creates safety concerns. I requested a drink while we were still on the tarmac." David clarified. The flight attendant later agreed to bring it. "So let's not pretend this was a safety issue." He paused, his voice dropping lower, more controlled. "The truth is, you used the public intercom to publicly reprimand a black first-class passenger simply for requesting a glass of scotch." Moore's face reddened. "That's a serious accusation, sir. That's a serious accusation, sir." Captain Vincent Moore blurted out, his face showing clear tension. "And I completely deny it." Honestly, it would be hard to prove. David Hawthorne gave a small nod. "That may be true," he said slowly. "But that's not the main reason I wanted to speak with you, Captain Moore." He paused, letting the air between them settle. "I believe we've met before, in an indirect way. 6 months ago, you filed a complaint after being denied a managerial promotion. In it, you claimed it was the result of," he quoted verbatim, "reverse discrimination policies favoring less competent minority candidates." Surprise flickered in Moore's eyes. "How do you know about that?" "Because the firm that audited Continental Sky's promotion process at the time was a subsidiary of Summit Tech International." David stepped forward. "And I'm David Hawthorne, CEO of Summit Tech. And starting next week, I'll be your new superior." Moore's face went pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Speechless, Summit Tech's acquisition of Continental Skies Airlines will be officially announced tomorrow. David continued. "And one of my first priorities is reviewing the company's culture and leadership. Your announcement today was a very revealing preview." Moore stammered, his voice no longer confident. "Mr. Hawthorne, I didn't know. If that announcement came across the wrong way, I truly apologize. It was a poor choice of words. Nothing malicious." David stared at him without blinking. "I didn't come here for an apology. I wanted to look you in the eye and understand how someone in your position felt comfortable making a public statement that made a passenger feel othered simply because of his skin color. I didn't mean it like that. Moore insisted, his voice now laced with panic. I've served this airline for nearly 20 years. My record is spotless. Your flight safety record is indeed impeccable, David acknowledged. But your personnel file tells a different story. Multiple complaints from younger crew members, especially women and people of color. There are clear indications of resistance to diversity training and an outdated mindset that no longer fits the modern aviation industry. Moore's expression hardened. So, because of one misunderstood comment, my entire career ends. You've already made up your mind. David shook his head. I haven't decided anything yet. Captain Moore, what happens next largely depends on you. But let me make one thing clear. Summit Tech's culture is built on respect, inclusion, and fairness. That's not a slogan. It's something I've spent my entire life defending. He stepped closer. Voice lowering, my father had a master's degree in engineering, but he worked as a janitor because no firm in the 1970s would hire a black engineer. I've worn $3,000 suits and still been followed around in stores. I've been mistaken for the waiter more times than I can count. He lifted his gaze steady and direct. So, when I hear a pilot talk about knowing your place and first class, I take that personally. Moore lowered his head, unable to meet David's eyes. But this isn't just personal, David continued. It's about the future of this company. So, here's what's going to happen. You'll complete a full diversity and inclusion training program. You'll work directly with HR on a behavior improvement plan. And you'll show, not just say that you understand why what happened today is unacceptable. What if I refuse? Moore asked, still holding on to a thread of defiance. Then you'll be invited to find employment elsewhere, David replied plainly. The aviation industry is evolving, Captain Moore. The question is, are you willing to evolve with it? The cockpit fell silent. Only the distant beep of a luggage cart echoed from the tarmac. At last, Moore nodded, shoulders sinking. I understand, Mr. Hawthorne. I'll cooperate, good David said, checking his watch. I have another flight to catch. Moore looked confused. I thought you had a meeting tomorrow morning. Change of plans, David replied, turning toward the cockpit door. My daughter's playing piano at Arden Conservatory tonight. I've missed too many already. He paused, turning back once more. One more thing, Captain Moore. That young mother in economy you ignored. That's Dr. Asia Johnson, one of the leading cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. The elderly couple behind her are Professors James and Elizabeth Chen, pioneers in Alzheimer's treatment, and that so-called urban turbulence you referred to. That was me, a black passenger flying first class. He held his gaze. This world is full of people who might surprise you if you let go of your assumptions. Think about that during training, without waiting for a response. David exited the cockpit. Catherine was waiting near the galley. Everything all right, mister? Hawthorne. David smiled. All good. Now I need to reroute my itinerary. Can you direct me to the customer service counter? 30 minutes later, he stood at the ticket desk, phone to his ear. Victoria Lane's voice came through the line, a mix of surprise and joy. You're flying back to New York tonight. Sophia's playing her mother's favorite piece, David replied, sliding his credit card to the ticket agent. The merger can wait one more day. Then it's about time, Victoria chuckled. And Captain Moore. Do we need legal to step in? David glanced at the boarding pass being printed and smiled faintly. No, David Hawthorne replied calmly over the phone. He'll be enrolled in our advanced leadership program. I believe Captain Moore still has a chance. If he's willing to change. There was a pause on the line. So you still have a soft spot, Victoria Lane said, somewhat surprised. Not soft strategic. David answered. If I fire him immediately, he becomes a martyr to others who share his mindset. But if we turn him into a living example of transformation, the message will be far more powerful. He took the ticket from the counter agent and nodded in thanks. Besides, everyone deserves a chance to grow, especially when they've reached an age where the world no longer looks the way they remember. Victoria chuckled softly. The board is going to ask why you postponed the merger announcement. David made his way toward his new boarding gate, weaving through the crowd of passengers. Tell them their CEO decided to attend his daughter's piano recital. Because some things matter more than business. They'll understand. And if they don't, he added, his voice dropping, then that's a different issue. One that will need addressing. Fine, I'll use that exact line. Victoria laughed lightly. Tell Sophia. I said hi. And hey, I'm proud of you. The call ended. David paused at a small gift shop near the gate and picked out a bouquet of white lilies, Sophia's favorite. As he continued toward the boarding area, he found himself reflecting on the meeting with Captain Moore. The feeling within him was strange part, anger at the casual racism he'd endured, part unexpected hope. Not hope that Moore would change overnight. David was too experienced to believe in something so simple, but hope because that moment had made him pause and look inward. For years, he had fought quietly in boardrooms trying to open doors for people of color, believing that his own success was the most powerful contribution he could offer. Maybe that was true. But in return, he had let something precious slip away, his relationship with Sophia. Sitting at the gate, waiting to board his flight back to New York, David opened his phone and sent a message. Change of plans. I'll be there tonight, front row. Save me a seat. The reply came almost instantly. Seriously, Dad, that's amazing. But what about your big deal? David smiled as he typed back, some things can't wait. Like hearing you play Mom's favorite piece, the deal will still be there tomorrow. He paused, then added another line. I had an interesting conversation with the pilot today. It reminded me what really matters. Sophia replied right away. Sounds like a story I want to hear. I'll wait for you after the performance. Love you. Love you too. See you soon. David slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. Through the terminal window, planes were taking off and landing in the soft light of dusk. Sometimes he thought it takes confronting the uncomfortable to realize where you are and where you need to be. Captain Moore had tried to remind David of his place, but instead he reminded him of where he truly belonged. At Paul Hall of the Art and Conservatory, the lights dimmed just as David Hawthorne slipped into the front row. In his hands was the bouquet of lilies gently resting on his lap. He'd made it just in time. The taxi from JFK had barely navigated through Manhattan's choking traffic, but he was here on time, awake and fully present in this moment. The program in his hand read Sophia Hawthorne Performance. No. 5 beside her name was a professionally taken portrait, her face serious, reminding him suddenly of Eleanor whenever she was deep in focus. At 20, Sophia carried her mother's elegance, high cheekbones, graceful hands, but the depth in her eyes and quiet resolve were entirely David's. The first performer was a nervous young man fumbling through Beethoven's sonata. His fingers moved faster than his courage. David watched with empathy, remembering Sophia's recital at age 8 when she froze halfway through for Elise, eyes brimming until her mother's steady gaze from the front row silently whispered, "Breathe, sweetheart. Just breathe." The second performer was more polished, but her rendition of Liszt lacked emotion. The third and fourth faded into a blur as David's thoughts were completely taken by anticipation for what came next. And then Sophia stepped onto the stage. Her midnight blue dress shimmered under the lights, each of her steps flowing like water. As she sat at the piano and adjusted the bench, she looked up and saw him. Her eyes lit up with a sparkle of surprise, and David's throat tightened. That moment was worth every delayed meeting, every phone call he'd have to return after the recital. In the moment, Sophia Hawthorne looked down at the front row and met her father's gaze. She was 8 years old again, back to those early recitals when she needed that reassuring look from her dad in the audience. David Hawthorne gave a slight nod, and Sophia smiled a silent language only the two of them understood. She turned back to face the Steinway piano and began. The ballade in G minor opened slowly, tentatively, like the first breath of morning, then gradually pulled the audience into its fierce and dramatic crescendos. David closed his eyes for a moment, letting each note soak into his being. Eleanor, his late wife, used to play that same piece every Sunday morning. The sound would fill their home, drifting into every corner like sunlight slipping through drawn curtains. But today, as the music flowed from his daughter's hands, it was no longer the past Sophia played with a depth of feeling David hadn't expected, not just technical precision, but a refined emotional clarity, as if each note carried memory, love, and the legacy of the mother she never stopped missing. He wasn't a music expert, but he knew enough to recognize that his daughter wasn't just talented. She was exceptional. Pride surged within him, mingled with the ache of all the moments he'd missed. As the final note faded into the air, the concert hall held its breath, then erupted into applause. Sophia stood and bowed her eyes instinctively, finding her father again. He stood with the crowd, the bouquet of lilies pressed to his side, indifferent to the eyes watching him. After the recital ended, David waited in the reception area. He watched Sophia accept congratulations from professors and friends, the poise in her movements striking a tender chord in him. She was no longer the little girl he once carried on his shoulders. She was a young woman, confident and grounded dad. She called out, rushing into his arms, "I still can't believe you're really here." He hugged her tightly. His daughter, who was no longer a child, I couldn't miss it. "You played your mom's favorite piece." Sophia stepped back and took the bouquet with a radiant smile. "How did you pull this off? I thought tomorrow was your big announcement. It's been postponed. Some things are more important." He gently touched her cheek. "You played like a true artist, Sophia. Your mom would have been so proud." Her eyes shimmered. "I was thinking about her while I played. It's like only then did I really understand the piece. Eleanor used to say, 'Whenever there's Chopin in the air, that's me beside you.'" They stepped outside, the evening breeze of New York brushing against their skin. Along the way, Sophia stopped several times to introduce David to classmates and teachers. Each time the name David Hawthorne was spoken, it was met with a respectful gaze, not because he was CEO of Summit Tech, but because he was Sophia's father. It was a kind of recognition unlike anything he was used to, and it felt infinitely more meaningful. At the curb, Sophia squinted playfully. "Okay, now tell me what really happened with that pilot." "Your text made me so curious." David raised his hand to hail a cab. It's a long story over dinner. I think I owe you at least a dozen missed celebrations deal." Sophia laughed, sliding into the car. "But I want every detail. You never tell me the juicy parts of your job." As the cab rolled through Manhattan's crowded streets, David recounted the entire ordeal, Captain Vincent Moore's announcement, the tense confrontation in the cockpit, and ultimately his decision to reschedule everything to be at her performance. "Wait." Sophia interrupted, her eyes wide in disbelief. "He actually said urban turbulence over the intercom in 2025, and he didn't know you were going to be his new boss. Life has a way of arranging poetic ironies." David chuckled. "So, what did you do? Fire him?" David hesitated. "No, not yet. I want to give him a chance to change." Sophia frowned. "People like that don't change Dad." "Not really. They don't mean it." "Some don't." David nodded. "But sometimes when forced to face the consequences and shown a better path, they surprise you. He humiliated you in front of the entire cabin. You're being too kind." "Not kind." David shook his head, eyes gazing out the window. "Just realistic. The most sustainable way to change a system is to change the people inside it. If Captain Moore truly listens and grows, he could become a voice for progress among his own peers. That's worth more than replacing him." Sophia was quiet. "Mom used to say that was your superpower, seeing what others couldn't see in themselves. You're giving me too much credit." He smiled. "Really, it's just good business sense. Hiring new people costs more than transforming the ones you have. You always sound like a CEO." Sophia rolled her eyes, laughing. "But seriously, Dad," she added, "I'm proud of you for how you handled that and for showing up tonight." She paused, then added with a grin, "Still getting used to the idea that my dad is buying an entire airline." "Just a small one," David joked. "For now." The taxi pulled up to Carmine's, the classic Italian restaurant Eleanor used to take Sophia to after every childhood recital. As they stepped inside, David was surprised to hear the staff greet Sophia by name, proof she had quietly kept up the tradition all these years. Dinner passed gently over warm pasta and glasses of wine. The conversation between David Hawthorne and his daughter Sophia, flowing from school to work, from memories of Eleanor to dreams for the future, there was a quiet closeness between father and daughter, a bond that had long gone missing in rushed phone calls and brief holiday reunions. "I've been thinking," David said as they shared dessert, "I should spend more time in New York." Sophia looked up, surprised. "Really? But your company's based in Chicago." "Yes, but Summit Tech has a major office here too. I could work from the New York branch at least 1 week a month." He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, a habit Sophia recognized from whenever he was weighing a serious decision. "I'll need to rearrange a few things, but it's doable." Sophia's voice softened. "I'd really love that. I miss you, Dad. I miss you too." "Sophia, more than I've ever admitted." He reached out and took her hand. "Watching you play tonight made me realize what I've been missing. And your mom, she would have wanted me to choose this." Sophia squeezed his hand, her eyes shimmering. "Mom always understood you. She used to say it was your persistence and drive that made her fall in love with you, even when the world didn't make it easy." "Maybe," David said, with a wistful smile, "but she also taught me that success means nothing if it isn't shared with the people you love." He exhaled slowly. "I think I forgot that lesson for a while." As they left Carmine's, the Manhattan night had turned cool. The streets beginning to quiet, David's phone buzzed nonstop messages from Diane about the postponed merger announcement, updates from the board, follow-ups from executives waiting on his response. Back to reality. Sophia teased when she saw him glance at the screen. It can wait until morning. He slipped the phone away. Let me walk you home. They strolled together under the warm glow of streetlights. In David's mind, the image of Captain Vincent Moore resurfaced, the pilot whose careless comment had unwittingly given him a night with his daughter. He would never forget. Tomorrow, he'd fly to Atlanta to continue finalizing the acquisition of Trans-American Airlines, and Moore would begin his journey either toward growth or out the door. The job would remain a never-ending challenge of building real value. But tonight had shifted something in him, a quiet recalibration in how he saw life and what legacy truly meant. The wealth he built would have successors. His success would be recounted in earnings reports and business textbooks. But his love for Sophia, his memories of Eleanor and moments like tonight, those were the legacy that mattered most. In front of Sophia's apartment building, he hugged her again. I'll call after my meeting in Atlanta. He promised Dad Sophia called as she reached her door. I'm actually glad that pilot said something stupid today. David raised a brow. Oh, if he hadn't, you'd still be in meetings instead of sitting front row at my performance. She grinned playfully. Maybe I should send him a thank you note. David burst into laughter, a full, unrestrained sound that echoed down the quiet street. Let's not go that far. But I get your point. Sleep well, sweetheart. I love you. Love you too, Dad. As David watched his daughter disappear into the building, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, true peace. Tomorrow would bring meetings, decisions, and new challenges. But tonight had reminded him of a simple truth that many successful people forget. Sometimes the most important journey isn't climbing higher, but returning to the people and places that remind you why you started climbing at all. Hailing a taxi back to the hotel, David typed a final message to Diane. The recital was perfect. Flying to Atlanta in the morning. Oh, and Diane, make sure our company policy includes parental leave and flexible scheduling for parents. Some things shouldn't have to wait. A week later, David stood on stage at the Trans-American Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, addressing a full auditorium of employees, pilots, flight attendants, engineers, office staff, and senior leadership. The announcement of the acquisition went smoothly. The media responded positively. Share prices had steadily climbed over the past 5 days as the market absorbed the logic of the merger. Change can be unsettling, David said, his gaze sweeping across the hall, but it also brings opportunity. The Summit Tech Trans-American merger isn't about cutting down, it's about growth. It's about combining strengths to build something greater than the sum of its parts. From his vantage point on stage, he spotted Captain Vincent Moore sitting upright, his expression calm. They hadn't spoken since the conversation on the plane. But David had seen the reports Moore had enrolled in the company's diversity training program voluntarily without resistance. He had even offered to lead a peer discussion group with other senior pilots. Dinner passed gently with wine and warm Italian pasta as the conversation between David Hawthorne and his daughter Sophia shifted from school to work, from memories of Eleanor to hopes for the future. There was a quiet closeness between them, a connection they hadn't felt in years, not through rushed phone calls or brief holiday reunions. I've been thinking, David said as they shared dessert, I should spend more time in New York. Sophia looked up, surprised. Really, but your company's based in Chicago, true, but Summit Tech also has a large office here. I could work from the New York branch at least 1 week a month." He tapped his fingers on the table, a gesture Sophia recognized whenever her father was weighing a serious decision. "I'll need to rearrange a few things, but it's entirely doable." Sophia softened. "I'd really like that. I miss you. I miss you too, Sophia, more than I've ever admitted." He reached across and held her hand. "Watching you play tonight made me realize what I've been missing. And your mom, she would want me to prioritize this." Sophia squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "Mom always understood. She used to say your persistence and determination were what made her love you, even when the world made it hard for those things to thrive. Maybe, but she also taught me that success means nothing if you can't share it with the people you love." David gave a bittersweet smile. "I think I forgot that lesson for a while. When they stepped out of Carmine's, the Manhattan night had cooled and the streets had begun to quiet. David's phone buzzed constantly, messages from Diane about the postponed merger announcement, requests from board members and executives needing updates. Back to reality. Sophia smiled as she caught him glancing at the screen. "It can wait until morning." He put the phone away. "Let me walk you home." They walked through golden-lit streets. In David's mind, the image of Captain Vincent Moore surfaced again, the pilot whose careless comment had unwittingly gifted him an unforgettable evening with his daughter. Tomorrow, he would fly back to Atlanta, resume the acquisition of Trans-American Airlines, and Captain Moore would begin his own path either toward change or the exit. Work would remain a constant challenge of building meaningful value. But tonight had shifted something in him, a quiet evolution in how he viewed his life and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. At Sophia's apartment entrance, he hugged her. "One more time I'll call after the Atlanta meeting," he promised. "Dad," Sophia called as she reached the door. "I'm actually glad that pilot said something stupid today." David raised an eyebrow. "Oh, if he hadn't, you'd still be in Atlanta in some meeting instead of sitting front row at my recital." She grinned playfully. "Maybe I should send him a thank you note." David laughed, a full, hearty laugh that echoed into the quiet night. "Let's not go that far. But I get your point. Sleep well, sweetheart. I love you. Love you too, Dad." As David watched his daughter disappear into the building, he felt something he'd been missing for a long time. True peace, tomorrow, would bring meetings, decisions, and new challenges. But tonight had reminded him of a simple truth that many successful people forget. Sometimes the most important journey isn't climbing higher. It's returning to the people and places that remind you why you started climbing at all. Hailing a cab back to his hotel, David typed one last message to Diane. The recital was perfect, flying back to Atlanta tomorrow morning. And Diane, make sure our company policy includes parental leave and flexible scheduling for parents. Some things shouldn't have to wait. A week later, David stood at the podium at Trans-American Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, addressing a full room of employees, pilots, flight attendants, engineers, office staff, and senior executives. The merger announcement went smoothly. Media outlets responded positively. The stock price had risen steadily for 5 straight days as the market absorbed the logic behind the acquisition. "Change can be uncomfortable," David said, scanning the room, "but it also opens the door to opportunity. The Summit Tech Trans-American merger is not about cutting back. It's about growth. about combining our strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts. From the stage, he saw Captain Vincent Moore sitting upright, his expression composed. They hadn't spoken again since the flight, but David had received the updates Moore had enrolled in the company's diversity training program without protest. He had even volunteered to lead a peer group discussion with other senior pilots. Was this true change, or just a self-preserving reflex? David Hawthorne couldn't be sure. But he knew one thing: people have a way of surprising you. Throughout his career, he had seen it more than once. Real change, however, was never instant. It required sustained effort, uncomfortable conversations, and a willingness to challenge long-held beliefs. Some of you may be wondering how I plan to shape the culture at Transamerican. David continued, the answer is simple. We're going to build a company where every employee feels valued, where diversity is seen as strength, where we judge people not by how they look or where they come from, but by their ability, their work ethic, and their commitment to our shared mission. He paused for a moment, his gaze settling briefly on Captain Moore. In aviation, the most successful airlines aren't the ones that avoid change. They're the ones that embrace it, and that starts by questioning old ways to make room for better ones. After the speech, David mingled with the crowd, shaking hands and chatting with employees. He was in conversation with a group of flight attendants when Catherine Miller, the lead attendant from the Chicago flight, approached Mr. Hawthorne. "I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Lynn. She's been wanting a quick word." Sarah, the young flight attendant who had fumbled nervously in first class the week before, now stood beside Catherine with a shy but determined look. "How can I help you?" Sarah, David asked, his warm smile easing her nerves. "I just wanted to say thank you. Things have changed since that flight. For the better." "How so?" David tilted his head with interest. Sarah glanced at Catherine, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Captain Moore came to speak with me. He apologized for putting me in that awkward position with his announcement. He's never done that before. Is that?" So David replied, keeping his expression neutral. "That's a good start. It's not just him," Catherine added. "Word has spread across the company. A few senior pilots have started to shift their attitudes. Not completely, but there's real movement." David nodded, his gaze distant. Change begins with awareness. Sometimes it only takes one person to start it. As he made his way through the crowd, a familiar face approached Walter Kensington, now wearing a name badge, Director of Aviation Investments at Meridian Capital. Mr. Hawthorne, Kensington greeted him with a firm handshake. "Fantastic speech. I was especially impressed with the part about cultural integration. Too many deals chase profits and forget the human element." "Thank you, Kensington. But I'm curious what brings a Meridian executive to an internal company event." Kensington smiled. "We're major shareholders, and I wanted to see firsthand how you'd handle Moore." Lowering his voice, he added, "I noticed he's still employed." "That was unexpected," David replied calmly. "Everyone deserves a chance to change." Kensington Captain. Moore is a skilled pilot with 20 years of experience. Firing him would have been costly and disruptive. Helping him adjust to new expectations is far more effective. Pragmatic as ever, Kensington nodded. "But I wonder, is it truly pragmatism? The financial press doesn't usually paint you as the forgiving type." David smiled softly. "Then maybe they've been reading the wrong file, or maybe I'm changing too." Their conversation was interrupted by Diane Harper, tablet in hand. As always, sorry to interrupt David, but Sophia's calling. She says it's important. David quickly stepped into a quiet corner. His daughter's excited voice came through the line, "Dad, I got the scholarship from the Berlin Philharmonic." A wave of pride surged in David's chest. "That's incredible." "Sophia, congratulations. It starts in September. A year in Berlin, learning from the best musicians in the world. I know we just talked about you spending more time in New York, and now I'm leaving." "That's okay," David interrupted gently. "This is an amazing opportunity. We'll make it work. Summit Tech has an office in Frankfurt. I can extend business trips and swing by Berlin." "You'd really do that?" "I promised things would be different, and I keep my promises. Besides, I've never been to the Berlin Philharmonic time to expand my artistic horizons." After the call ended with plans for a celebration when she returned to New York, David walked back to Diane, who wore her signature wry expression. "Berlin," she grinned. "Guess I'll have to revise your fall travel schedule." Sophia got the scholarship. I want to be at as many of her performances as I can. David Hawthorne raised a hand to stop Diane Harper just as she was about to jot something down on her tablet. "And before you say it, I know the Trans-American merger is entering a critical phase. I know the board is awaiting the quarterly integration report. And I'm aware the Asia expansion campaign kicks off in October." "I wasn't going to say any of that," Diane replied with a subtle lift of her eyebrow. "I was just going to say it's about time." David blinked. "It's about time, David. I've known you for 15 years. I was there when Eleanor passed away, when you buried yourself in work like you could outrun grief. I've watched you build Summit Tech into a global empire while drifting further from the things Eleanor valued most." Family art balance. Diane's voice was gentle but firm. She would have supported this change, and so do I. Before David could reply, a commotion near the entrance to the hall caught his attention. Captain Vincent Moore was engaged in a heated argument with a younger black pilot. Their gestures were tense, though their voices stayed low. "Excuse me," David said to Diane, walking over. He caught a few fragmented phrases. "It's not about capability. It's about opportunity," the young pilot was saying, frustration clearly in his tone. "And what about years of experience?" "Now it's just ticking diversity boxes," Moore replied. Face flushed. "Is there a problem here?" David interjected, his voice calm but firm. Both men immediately straightened up. Moore said, "No issue, Mr. Hawthorne. Just a professional disagreement with First Officer Tyler Jenkins about the diversity advancement policy." "I assume," David glanced at both of them, "an important topic. Perhaps we should continue this discussion. The three of us." My office. In 15 minutes. It wasn't exactly a request. 15 minutes later, David sat across from the two pilots in a borrowed office at Trans-American headquarters. The air was taut. Neither man met the other's eye. So David began, "Can one of you explain what just happened?" A few seconds passed in silence. Then Jenkins spoke. "The company just announced a mentoring program for underrepresented employees, including women and minorities. I expressed interest. Captain Moore said the program is unnecessary, unfair." Moore corrected, jaw clenched. "Aviation should be about merit. The best people should rise, not because they check boxes on a diversity spreadsheet." I see David nodded. "First Officer Jenkins, how long have you been here?" 8 years, sir. My safety record and performance reviews are excellent. And your current position? First officer on domestic routes. I've applied for captain promotion 3 times in the past 2 years. Still pending review. David turned to Moore. How long did it take you to go from first officer to captain? 5 years. Moore answered, voice lower. But it was different then. How? So fewer applicants. More openings. David leaned forward slightly. Do you believe Jenkins isn't qualified? Moore glanced at Jenkins for the first time during the meeting. Technically, he's qualified. Thank you. Jenkins muttered, lips pressed tight. Let me share some numbers, David said, currently. Transamerican has 137 captains. Of those, 126 are white men, 8 are white women, 2 are men of color, and just 1 is a woman of color. Meanwhile, the First Officer Corps and training classes are far more diverse. He looked directly at Moore. Do you think that kind of imbalance reflects only technical capability? Statistics aren't proof, Moore said. There are other factors, such as experience, seniority, and route certification. David agreed. But when this pattern repeats across years and across airlines, we need to seriously examine structural issues. He turned to Jenkins. Have you encountered specific barriers? Fewer chances to join internal networking groups where advancement tips are shared, Jenkins said clearly. Less feedback from supervisors compared to my white colleagues, and limited access to premium routes that build qualifying flight hours. David nodded. The mentorship program is designed to address that, yes. It pairs senior captains with promising junior pilots, especially from underrepresented groups. It provides clear feedback, networking opportunities, and sponsorship within the organization. David looked at Moore. You've got 20 years of experience. With that knowledge, you could be an incredibly valuable mentor. The question is, are you willing to do it? My daughter called me last night. Captain Vincent. Moore said, his voice low and thoughtful. She's a software engineer in Silicon Valley, smart, successful. But she told me she's been passed over for promotion 3 times, even after leading major projects while less competent men were chosen. There was a flicker of painful recognition on Vincent's face. What she described, the invisible barriers, the lack of mentorship, the feeling of not being valued, those are the same things Jenkins talked about. And I realized I'm part of the problem. With my daughter, with pilots, like Tyler Jenkins, with young flight attendants like Sarah. Not because I'm malicious, but because I was blind to experiences that weren't mine. David Hawthorne nodded slowly. That's no small realization, Captain Moore. So, what do you intend to do with it? I've accepted a mentorship role for Jenkins and volunteered to work with HR to review the promotion process from a senior pilot's perspective. I want to help identify where unconscious bias might be creeping in. Vincent sat up straighter, his voice firmer. Now, I'm not saying I've had a conversion overnight. I still have doubts, but I'm willing to listen to learn and to admit that my perspective might be limited. That's enough, David replied. Growth isn't about perfection, it's about direction. Vincent hesitated, then added, I also want to apologize formally. That announcement I made, it was completely unprofessional, inappropriate, and beneath the standard I've always claimed to uphold. Whatever my personal views, I had no right to make any passenger feel disrespected. David nodded simply. I accept your apology, but I'd recommend you also apologize to Sarah. She was put in an awkward position because of that announcement. "Already done, sir," Vincent replied with a faint smile. She was gracious. As the two stepped out into the hallway, David reflected on all that had unfolded over the past week. From one offensive remark on the PA system, a wave of change had rippled across Transamerican's culture and within himself. "My daughter will be performing with the Berlin Philharmonic next year," David said as they neared the exit. "It's a major milestone." "Congratulations," Vincent replied. "You must be proud. I'm very proud. And I plan to attend every performance I can, even if it means joining Zoom meetings from hotel rooms between concerts." Vincent nodded. "My wife's been telling me I should cut back on flight hours, spend more time with the grandkids. Maybe it's time some things can't wait," David said with a smile, repeating the message he had once sent Diane on that night in New York. As he watched Vincent Moore disappear down the corridor, David couldn't help but think about their two intersecting journeys. Different backgrounds, different starting lines, but perhaps converging now at a common point, an awakening to what truly matters. David's phone buzzed. A message from Jessica. "I've booked your seat for opening night in Berlin. Don't you dare miss it." David laughed aloud, replying, "I won't miss it. Some things are non-negotiable." He looked up at the Transamerican logo on the lobby wall, soon to be replaced by Summit Tech's symbol. A quiet satisfaction rose in him not from profits or stock prices, but from the human connections being mended, the perspectives being widened, the priorities being reshaped. Captain Moore's announcement had once been meant to remind someone of their proper place. But its true legacy turned out to be something very different. A chain of realizations about belonging, about worth, about the places we choose to show up, and the people we choose to become. As David stepped out of the headquarters, Atlanta's bright sunlight washed over him and he felt lighter, as if releasing a burden he hadn't even known he was carrying. The merger would continue. The business would grow. But alongside it, something else was also taking root, a deeper definition of success. One that reached beyond financial statements and touched the heart of an organization. The father, who once worked as a janitor, despite holding an engineering degree, would have smiled at the irony. Sometimes, the most valuable business lessons don't come from Harvard or leadership seminars, but from friction and honest connection that remind us who we are and why we rise. David glanced at his watch. Time to head to the airport for his flight to Chicago. There was still much to do, many decisions to make, but this time he would face them with a clearer purpose. Success still mattered, but some things mattered more, and some things can't wait. Sometimes life sends us unexpected jolts, like a loaded remark over the PA system or a seemingly ordinary flight that ends up marking a turning point no one could have predicted. David Hawthorne's story is not just the journey of a CEO confronting bias, it's also the journey of a father learning to love at the right time, of a leader learning to listen, and of a human being learning to let go of perfection in order to rediscover what truly matters. The message of this story doesn't lie in confrontation, but in transformation. A transformation sparked by a single comment, an honest conversation, a choice to stand on the side of human dignity. None of us are perfect, but all of us can choose to grow. And sometimes the most powerful change comes from those who were once the most resistant, if they're given a chance, offered guidance, and truly seen through the lens of trust. Through every moment of this story, we hope you've felt that success isn't only found in deals or profit reports. True success lies in learning how to balance ambition with connection, power with empathy, ego with grace. Because some things, like a Chopin piece played by your own daughter, can't be postponed. And some things, like kindness change or simply a phone call from someone you love, are what give life its true meaning. If this story moved, made you reflect, or simply brought a smile to your face, please like to show your support, share to spread this positive message further, and subscribe so you don't miss the next meaningful story, because who knows? Maybe from a single video, a single voice, a single feeling, you'll begin a new journey of your own. A journey where you're no longer just climbing higher, but learning to pause at the right moment and return to the place where those you love are waiting. Thank you for walking with us through this story, and we'll see you again on the next journey.